Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Sports Talk with Austin, your daily dose of sports and entertainment. In today's video, me and Jackson Johnson preview and break down the 2023-2024 college football playoffs, granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl, as number one Michigan takes on number four Alabama, and we give our preview and our predictions on this game and talk about who will be advancing to the national championship in RG Stadium on January 8th.
Gus, the granddaddy of them all.
Yes, we are going to start with the 2023-2024 Rose Bowl and talk about Michigan versus Alabama, the 1 versus the 4. It'll be 5 p.m. Eastern time, 4 p.m. Central time, Central time, and it'll be in Pasadena, California. This is what everyone dreams of. This is the stuff of legends. We all remember some Rose Bowl games somewhere down the road in our life. Like the most memorable one for me in recent memory was when Oregon beat Florida State in 2014. Marcus Mariota went up and down the field on that Seminoles defense. Jackson, before we get into this, do you have any fond memories of this glorious game of the Rose Bowl?
Oh my God, I got a ton of them. I mean, the 2011 Rose Bowl between TCU and Wisconsin, that's one of my favorite Rose Bowls right there. The 1926 Rose Bowl between Alabama, Washington, the game that changed the South forever is one of my favorites as well, because hint, it was the game that really started the Alabama Crimson Tide. It's what they're known for now, a blue blood. And as a matter of fact, they were the first ever team from the South to ever play in a Rose Bowl. So that's tremendous right there in of itself.
Yes, it is, Jackson.
But I have another
go
one
ahead.
if you like to hear one. The 2014 Rose Bowl between Michigan State and Stanford. I mean, that game was a tremendous dogfight right there. I mean, that was a dogfight.
Those are all some wonderful memory Rose Bowls for sure. And let's go make some new ones, shall we? And Jackson, let's start with the Michigan side of things. They went 13-0. They ran the Big Ten gauntlet. They're the number one team in all the land. But there's some controversy surrounding Michigan of, are they stealing signs? Are they not? Kind of, a lot of people are thinking Michigan, if they win this game, it could get taken from them. They win it all, it could get taken from them. And it kind of has put a deflation on their season because many people are hoping for their downfall. But Michigan has stayed upright as of far, and they've been able to beat all the allegations, especially with Jim Harbaugh getting suspended for those 3 games. But, we try not to focus on that as much. But, Jackson, that is a big storyline in this game for sure. Just talk about that just for a minute. We don't want to spend too much time on it, take away from this game. But talk about how that has been looming over Michigan's season and maybe could affect what happens in this game.
Like, I don't think that's going to affect them too much, honestly, but I do know that little storyline from Adam Rittenberg where he's talking about how they got a notice of alleged violations. So that may put a little damper. I don't think it's going to put a damper in 2023. And if Michigan wins it all, I don't think you're going to see them having to vacate it. But I do think that something's going to be up. I mean, they'll probably pay a fine, but that's it.
Yeah, for sure. Just want to get that out of the way because we don't want to take away from this game. This is going to be a great game no matter who wins, and whoever wins is the best football team. But let's talk about Michigan and how they got here, Jackson. So at the beginning of the year, their non-conference schedule
That was pitiful.
It's pitiful to be nice. UNLV's looking like their best win out of that. And then you kind of go down the row and you're like, Rutgers, they're a nice bowl team. Nebraska, we thought was going to make bowl eligibility, but then they lost it at the end. They returned to Scott Frost, Nebraska. Poor Nebraska fans. How do y'all suffer through that? But, then you got Minnesota and then the pitiful Indiana. Then you have Michigan State, who they're just as big a mess. And they spanked them. And then Purdue. And then Penn State, Maryland, and then Ohio State. And obviously, Maryland was the week before rivalry week. A lot of things go on. It's one of those games that are trap games. Me and Jackson, we discussed it on our Saturday night recaps that we do during the season, talking about you can't put much stock into it because it is before rivalry week. Teams tend to play up to Michigan, Ohio State, try to catch them sleeping. But Jackson, just talk about Michigan and their early half of their schedule. Do you think this schedule that they have before they got to Penn State, do you think that hurts them in a way, not being as battle tested as maybe, say, Alabama, their opponent?
I don't think it hurts them as much because they did win the Big Ten. They did beat Ohio State, which I think really helped them get into the playoffs. Because if they didn't beat Ohio State, they were screwed. I mean, they basically needed to go unbeaten. And how they did without Harbaugh was the test. I mean, how they did against Penn State right then and there without Harbaugh. How they did against the Ohio State without Coach Harbaugh. It makes me wonder if Sharon Moore is going to be the next Ryan Day. Will he be leaving for better pastures, or is he going to sit and wait for Harbaugh to leave for the NFL or retire at Michigan to take over as the next head coach? That's my question for the future, but I think that win over UNLV. Let's talk about that for a bit. Now, UNLV, it looked like another dominating victory. But you see right there where they were tied for a spot in the Mount West title game, but unfortunately they lost to Boise State and they lost to San Jose State on rivalry week. But ever since they lost to Michigan, they basically, with the exception against Fresno State, San Jose State, Boise State, they basically beat everyone on that schedule. I mean, they had that big win over Vandy. I mean, Vandy's a big win for UNLV. But the fact that UNLV had a 9-win season looks great right there. I mean, what an amazing turnaround job by Barry Odom. And I'll tell you who it helped make look good. It made the Michigan Wolverines look good. But we look at, then there's Bowling Green. I mean, they were kind of a Jekyll and Hyde team. I mean, one week they did all right against Georgia Tech, but then next thing we knew, they weren't doing so hot against anybody else.
Yeah, that is for sure. But Jackson, there is something to be said that this could affect Michigan because Jackson, if forget the conference for just a second. When you don't schedule people out of non-conference and then you play someone like an Alabama in these scenarios, it really shows what kind of team you've got because you haven't been tested yet. Other than Ohio State, they haven't been tested really. You can make that argument.
You don't think
I
Penn
feel like
State was a test?
I think it was a test, Jackson, in the fact that Jim Harbaugh wasn't there. If he was there, Jackson, I feel like that game could have gotten out of hand. I feel like Michigan and their emotions maybe got the best of them that day. And Penn State, don't get me wrong, they had a fantastic defense. but Michigan's defense was smothering that offense. If Michigan had Jim Harbaugh, there was a possibility that that game could have gotten a little ugly, and Penn State might not have lost by as much as they did. Would you agree, or do you think that doesn't play a role?
I don't think it played a role too much. I mean, I think they were going to be fine with Coach Harbaugh or with Coach Moore. I mean, they're fine either way. But yeah, well, unfortunately, that Michigan State win, it isn't an impressive win. Purdue's not an impressive win. Indiana sure isn't an impressive win. Minnesota looked impressive for a while, especially when Minnesota upset Iowa. But then Minnesota let that Iowa game go to their head. Rutgers looked impressive until the month of November. Nebraska looked like an impressive win until November.
Yeah, it's one of those schedules, Jackson, where if they didn't win out, like if they didn't go unbeaten, they might have not made the playoffs. Would that have been fair to say?
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, had they lost one of their games, they'd have been in trouble.
Yeah, that's definitely a big talking point. But Jackson, they're number one. They went unbeaten. And I will say this
True.
before we head to Alabama. Before we head to Bama, Michigan, they're a team that against the weaker opponents, they dominated, did what they were supposed to do. But when they got against some of those teams that were on their level, they were in a rock fight. So that could help them in that sense. That the Bama, who gets tested, they're in a rock fight with them. But as for Michigan overall, I would say right now, Jackson, if this is where it ends, I would say Michigan had a great season. Would you agree with that?
I would think so. However, they unfortunately would garner the reputation that they cannot get it done in the big games in the playoffs. That's going to be the problem because 2021, we saw they got routed by Georgia. I mean, everybody was too impressed with them basically taking back control of the Big Ten, which nobody should be upset about 2021. 2022, they should have beaten TCU, but they didn't. And now this year, we're going to see the question. Can Michigan win a big game in the postseason? And if they lose this game, they will have the reputation of the LA Dodgers, the Milwaukee Bucks, and sorry to throw this name out to you, Dallas Cowboys, and a few other teams like Purdue basketball. So that's gonna
Yes, for
be,
sure, Jay.
yeah. I mean those are gonna be the teams that are on that list, right? Oh, did I forget to mention the LA Clippers? They would be the college football equivalent of the LA Clippers. But let's look at some of their stats. I mean, the passing yards, 73rd in the nation. They need to get a little higher. But J.J. McCarthy's been pretty good. He's been pretty good. The rushing game, I'm surprised isn't higher. I mean, it's 60th in the nation. What's behind that,
True.
man? You think they're just kind of saving it up for the postseason?
Well, Jackson, and if you look at the schedule, they played a lot of weaker teams to start, so maybe they pulled their starters out early, and they weren't. Maybe that's why the stats don't look as bulked as maybe these other three teams that we're going to look at. They were like,
yeah.
we're up 30-0. Let's go on and pull them.
Yeah, and I see that the defense is really good. But I couldn't help but notice that they do not have any penalties whatsoever. They're second in the nation in fewest penalties per game. They don't mess around.
Yes, but Jackson, I know we're talking about Michigan here, but let's talk about the team that no one ever questions when it comes to the playoffs and championships, and that is the Alabama Crimson Tide, who went
Yep.
12-1, went 12-1. No, excuse me, went 12-1 and won the SEC over the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, Jackson, you're obviously an Alabama fan, and you've watched them pretty much your whole life, including this year. Excuse me. And you've seen Alabama do some incredible things in your time. But where does this Bama team rank to you all time? Because this hasn't been one of Nick Saban's best teams, but they're winning these games, and they're to this point. So where do they rank for you in terms of Alabama's great teams before we get into the
Unfortunately,
schedule?
it doesn't get up there with 2011, 2009, 2012, 2015, 2017 for me. But
That's fair. I mean, that's fair. They definitely have some of their own issues that they need to fix, that they did fix. And Jackson, first week of the season, Bama took care of business. Jalen Milroe looked like a Heisman contender. And then came the Texas game, which, Jackson, I know we'll get to Texas, and we found out Texas was actually back, and that Texas is actually good to great. But Jackson, then you see the South Florida game, and that was a struggle win, big time. Now, I'll ask you this, Jackson. Do you think that there's ever, do you think that was on Jalen Milroe? That he was as bad as everyone was saying he was?
no.
Or do you think that was just more of he ran into a really good opponent, and then against South Florida, maybe the weather hindered him, and then Nick Saban kind of said, you know what, to get everyone to be quiet about him, let's put these other two in to show them that Milroe is the better quarterback. Just take me through your process, those first three games.
I think he was bringing the other two in to prove that Milroe was better. And secondly, that weather, oh my God, that played a factor. I mean, I've seen Alabama in my lifetime have to get through some bad weather, especially on old highlight videos like 1966 against Tennessee. But yeah, that's another time for another day. That South Florida game, they brought their A game against Alabama, and those penalties, those are what killed us. Throughout the first half of the season. You look back at Texas, those were one of the things that cost us against Texas, those penalties. The South Florida game, oh my God. That was another factor right there. Texas A&M, the penalties almost cost us that game, because you look here and it's a 26-20 victory. It should have been much higher, especially when we had the blocked field goal return. You would think it would have been much higher due to that, but there's a holding call. But I will tell you, though, guess who basically told Nick Saban it's okay to go back to being fiery, Nick Saban? Miss Terry. She was like, yeah, you got to get back to being angry, coach. You got to get back to being angry, coach. And you see right there, he lit a fire into Alabama, especially in the battle against Tennessee in the second half, where it was a 20-7 lead. But then Alabama comes back and scores 27 unanswered points against the Volunteers. Then we go up against LSU, and we basically just had a good one against Jaden Daniels, but oh man, Kentucky. I mean, we smacked them around. Of course, we were going to smack down Chattanooga, which, I mean, I don't even want to get into that Chattanooga game. But the Iron Bowl, we got lucky. If you look back on, After Dark the week before the Iron Bowl, the day after Alabama beat Chattanooga, I said Auburn may have lost to New Mexico State. Yes. But nobody brings their A game against New Mexico State. Everybody brings their A game against the Alabama Crimson Tide. They did, and we almost lost. And when you look back, you see that fantastic finish from Jalen Milroe and Isaiah Bond on 4th and goal. Fantastic
Isaiah Bond in the back of the end zone. Bond. But yeah,
Isaiah
that
Bond.
was definitely Jackson. Just imagine if Bama doesn't get that. Bama's not here right now. Even if they beat Georgia, more than likely they're not here. Which we'll get to Georgia and all the circumstances surrounding it in just a second. But I do want to mention some of the games up top. Tennessee, that was a great win by Alabama, especially because a lot of people thought Tennessee could beat Alabama 2 years in a row, including me. I had faith in Joe Milton and that offense, but it turns out Tennessee was not as good as I thought, or a lot of people thought, especially in Gainesville. Don't even get us started on that. Don't even get us started. But Kentucky, a lot of Kentucky fans had hype after they beat Florida, and then Georgia kind of whipped some sense into them, and then certain Kentucky fans were saying they were going to beat Alabama. Alabama's washed, and then Alabama's whipped them as well. But Jackson, what I find interesting, you look at that Arkansas game, that was a little concerning at the time. 24-21. What went wrong that day? Because we come to find out Arkansas was not a very good team this year. And looking back at it now, we are seeing that Alabama almost lost that game too. Jackson, what do you think went wrong in that game? Because they could have easily had their second loss right there.
Yeah, I mean, that was not good against Arkansas. Like, I thought we were gonna have a better showing than we did in the second half, but the first half we looked a lot better. But again, we basically just hurt ourselves with some of those penalties in that game. We got lucky against them, but it shouldn't have come down to that for sure.
Yeah, and like you said, the great win over Texas A&M, and then obviously the Texas game. Touch on that real quick. Jackson, I think a lot of people thought Alabama had caught a break in 2019, if you remember. No, 2022, excuse me. My pardon. Thought they got lucky that, maybe Bryce Young's shin should have been down. Texas should have been up this. And a lot of people had a sense that Alabama may have gotten lucky and that this year Texas was out to get them. And Jackson, what were your thoughts going into that game? Did you ever think that Bama would get beat by 10 points at home against Texas? Did that ever even cross your mind? Because I'm sure as a Bama fan, you've seen a lot of games in your lifetime, but I'll let you go ahead on that.
Well, when I look back at the Alabama-Texas game, I mean, if there's going to be somebody that was going to beat Alabama, it'd be the Texas Longhorns, especially after the fact that Quinn Ewers and Texas, had Quinn Ewers not been hurt in 2022, I think they would have beaten Alabama and Austin. But I think what also motivated Texas in a way were some of the Bama players doing the horns down business. They weren't too happy about that, I bet. And it was just not.
Yeah. And then Nick Saban got on him and said, "Don't do that stupid crap." Which you don't do that. You don't poke the bear. But Jackson, I think unfortunately we have to get to this because this is where the controversy starts for Alabama and their season because they're playing Georgia in the SEC championship game. This is probably the biggest game of all of college football besides the Natty in the playoffs. But we see on the other side of the spectrum, and this is important to know because Florida State is playing my Louisville Cardinals for the ACC championship. And and Alabama took care of business, did what they were supposed to do. They beat Georgia when a lot of people thought Georgia was going to go unbeaten. And then it brought up questions of, oh, Florida State just win and you're in, right? And then it comes in that, oh, you need some style points. Run up the score a little bit. Now, I'll let Jackson take us through this experience through the Bama lenses. But Jackson, when you saw that Alabama got in over Florida State, even after such a great victory, do you think that there is a little dark cloud over Bama? Because a lot of Florida State fans are mad at you all because of Greg Sankey and his SEC lobbying.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching College Game Day where Sankey was basically lobbying for two SEC teams, or basically to make sure an SEC team was getting in regardless of the result. And I'm like, wait a minute. Game hasn't been played yet. But I thought it was going to be, Florida State getting in, but either Texas is left out or Alabama gets left out. But I mean, because I thought they would be leaving Texas out, but they didn't. I mean, I'm happy that Bama's getting a shot at revenge, depending on how we do against the Rose Bowl, against Michigan, and depending how Texas does against Washington. I guess we'll wait and see. I mean, I'm happy we may get a shot revenge, but I didn't want it like this. I didn't want it to come at the expense of Florida State getting screwed up. And, I had a couple of episodes of the Jacksonian with Richie Barnes, the co-host of Double Fries No Slaw, and George Georgitis, the co-host of the Renegade Report, where I was basically like, look, I'm happy Bama's in, but I didn't want it to be like this.
Yeah,
And they were like,
it's one
look,
of
we,
those
we don't
things.
blame Bama fans. That like Florida State fans, they've made it clear they don't blame Bama Nation. They blame the lobbying of Sankey. They blame the NC State AD, and they blame ESPN, which I can't say I can blame them because I don't.
In which Jackson, not to get too clouded over this, because I do want to mention that fantastic victory over Georgia, because a
Oh
lot of
Lord,
Georgia fans were thought the Bulldogs were going to make history and three-peat, and Bama denied their request to that. We'll get to that because we have to mention that because that's such a great win and should be recognized. But I do have to also mention this too, Jackson. It's very interesting that how did Greg Sankey know that? Why was he lobbying for two teams? Did he already know the outcome? I mean, like, that's just one of those that are very interesting. And number two is, Jackson, this whole argument of the four best or four deserving, that gets under my skin a little bit because they're saying they put Alabama in because this is the four best, this is the best playoffs. Well, then what did you do in years past with like TCU and Cincinnati and those type teams? Was TCU one of the four best last year, Jackson?
I would say they were.
Really? Okay. Now, Jackson, a lot of people would say Bama is far and away better than TCU.
I mean, Bama would have beaten them. Don't get me wrong. Bama would have beaten TCU. But they were one of the foremost deserving and one of the four best teams in the top four.
Like what I want to know, Jackson, is I just want consistency out of this committee. I have no problem with them putting Bama in if they want to use the argument for best, but I just want consistency out of them. If we're going by the scale of for best, do that every year. If we're going by deserving, do that every year. I just want consistency. How do you feel on that, Jackson?
Same. I mean, I like to see some consistency, but it's just one opinion here one year and one opinion here the next year.
Mm-hmm. But Jackson, we do have to mention before you get on with the stats and talk about Bama in their stats. Let's talk about that Georgia game because this was one of the biggest games of the college football season, like I mentioned before. And Alabama, arguably was probably the best matchup for Georgia. Georgia had ran through a lot of their opponents, and everyone knew it was going to be Bama, Georgia, in Atlanta more than likely. And it was. And Jackson, you stopped the quest of Georgia's three-peat. Talk to me about how Bama consistently finds ways to do this. Just when people think that someone's ready to take over Bama's throne, Nick Saban always takes it back. Just talk to me about that. Like how Georgia fans might have jumped the gun on taking over Bama's throne. And just talk about this great win and how you got to this point off of a season where wasn't the best of seasons, but it was a great road to get there.
A lot of people forget about how Alabama does as an underdog, which is rare. When Bama's an underdog, they always thrive as the dog. And they basically proved it against the Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC title game. And, people forget Kirby Smart actually has a losing record against Nick Saban. There's a lot of people that forget that, but he could not get it done against Saban for the longest time until the 2021 Natty. Now, Kirby's got one win, but I think he will get more wins against Saban at some point. And, he's basically proven himself. But Coach Saban, man, he showed that, hey, Bama's still the king. Don't forget it.
That is true. That is true. But you look at some of Alabama's statistics. The penalties have gone down, from where they were in the beginning of the season. Alabama, I'll let Jackson take it over from here, Jackson. Talk about some of Bama's statisticals and talk about how you've seen some of this growth in your team over the weeks in.
We're 23rd in passing yards allowed, but we are 60th in the passing game on offense. In the points allowed per game, we are 17th in the nation. So that we have to get those numbers up big time. But the red zone defense needs to get higher. It's 50th in the nation. The red zone offense is 7th in the nation. That's pretty good against a team, especially against a team like Michigan coming up. So we got to get that going. We straightened up real quick on the penalties. You do not see that many penalties on Bama these days. So that we don't have any more penalties anytime soon. I mean, we got some, but not as much. We're 46th in rushing yards per game. We're tied 47th. That's not bad, but it's not good either. But we look at the running game on defense, it's 29th in the nation. So basically, if you want to get at Alabama, all you got to do is utilize Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. Bam.
It's true.
And we also
that's going to be a big factor. That's going to be a big factor, Jackson. I don't think Michigan is going to have a field day with their passing, especially with Kool-Aid McKinstry back there. He's an all-pro, all-American corner. I think he's going to be a high draft pick if he decides to go and when he goes. So I think Michigan's going to have to rely on that run game. But one thing that Alabama always preaches is you got to win in the trenches first. And like you said, Jackson, to your point, they got to keep J.J. McCarthy upright if they want any shot to win this game. But with all that being said, Jackson, I'll let you pick on this game first. First, Jackson, who are you predicting to win this game? And give me your X factor for this game. A player that you feel could change this game.
Well, I think that Blake Corum can change the game. I think that Jace McClellan can change the game as well. But I think Rico Wilson will definitely have to step up. And I think Jermaine Burton will definitely be making sure he has to step up as well. What that O-line of Alabama needs to do is protect Jalen Milroe. You do that, you're good to go. But in all honesty, I believe this game is going to end in a 31-28 victory for the Alabama Crimson Tide.
What a shocker. The Alabama man picks Alabama. Who could have seen that coming? Oh my gosh, breaking news. But in all seriousness, though, that's a good prediction, Jackson. That's a good prediction. I will say the biggest thing for me is I think Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to be the biggest key in this game because Roman Wilson he's going to have to stay on Roman Wilson and make sure that J.J. McCarthy doesn't get it to his favorite target. Bama's going to have to win in the trenches early, and Michigan's O-line is going to have to do what it's done all year and prevent J.J. McCarthy from going to the ground. And Jalen Milroe can't turn the ball over, and he's got to use his legs. But with all that being said, I am going to pick Alabama 34-20 over the Michigan Wolverines. I'm going 34-20 Bama. I think they win in dominant fashion, and Bama proves why they are the standard still.
And for more great content here at Sports Talk with Austin, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell so you never miss another video on anything college football, college basketball, and the NBA. Hey, here at Sports Talk with Austin, it's Cardinals for life, baby. I'm out. Stay in.